Children in Newtown, Connecticut are about to start their third week of school, a brand new school year, an attempt to return to normalcy. This only 9 months after 20 students and 6 staff members were massacred at the Sandy Hook Elementary School. Only 9 months since we collectively as a country said never again. And yet in that 9 months, there has been no national response on gun reform. Congress has effectively done nothing. In the Senate, a comprehensive gun reform bill failed to make it to the floor for a full vote, could not reach a 60-vote threshold. Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal called the day that happened a day of shame. And President Obama hugged victims' families in the Rose Garden, promising not to give up. But so far, the only meaningful action has come at the state level. Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and Colorado, which may be one of the last places you'd expect to pass tough gun reform legislation. But that state, having experienced its own mass shooting in 2012, passed universal background checks and a limit on high-capacity ammunition clips to 15 bullets. Those laws in Colorado, those new laws in Colorado, are now facing a fierce and unprecedented rollback effort, an effort that will come to a head in just 2 days. 2 Democrats there, State Senate President John Morse of Colorado Springs and State Senator Angela Herron of Pueblo. They both voted for those gun control measures, and they are now fighting for their lives, fighting for their seats in recall elections this Tuesday. These may be local races in 2 small state legislative districts, but there are clear national implications here. Outside money is pouring in from both sides. New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg spending hundreds of thousands against the recall. National Rifle Association pouring in hundreds of thousands for the recall. Political activity has been so high that one county clerk extended early voting hours last week. Polls are closed for the day in Colorado Springs, but they are open in Pueblo. And again, in just 2 days, this election could send a shudder down the spines of gun control advocates everywhere. Or it could serve as a sign that even in small-town Colorado, Americans are okay with tighter gun laws. Still with us at the table is Dave Weigel of Slate. He's joined now also by Rick Palacio. He's the chairman of the Colorado Democratic Party. Dick Wadhams, he's the former chairman of the Colorado Republican Party. And our friend Curtis Lee is a political reporter at the Denver Post. So thank you all for joining us. Dave, I already thanked you, but thanks for staying with us. Curtis, I'll start with you. Just, we have these 2 state senators who are facing recalls on Tuesday. If you could just tell a national audience that doesn't know much about Herron, doesn't know much about Morse, what the basic dynamics in these districts are, and is one more vulnerable than the other? How are these things looking right now, 2 days out?
Well, Senator John Morse is the Senate president in Colorado, and he's in a district in southern Colorado in El Paso County, which leans, it's divided evenly among Democrats, Republicans, and unaffiliated voters. It is a very competitive seat. That's why he was targeted in these recall efforts. In Pueblo, Senator Angela Herron, she's in a much more Democrat-leaning district, but also these are different kinds of Democrats. They're not your Denver or Boulder liberals. They're much more blue dog kind of Democrats per se. So they're both facing the recalls. Millions of dollars have poured into these recall efforts from the national level, like you had said in your setup piece. And Tuesday, it comes to a head. And Colorado really is kind of a litmus test of sorts for the national gun debate. Outside of New York, Connecticut, and Maryland, Colorado is the only state to pass tougher gun laws.
And tell us, right, so that's part of the story here is, John Hickenlooper, he's the Democratic governor. He was reelected by a pretty wide margin, but then in the wake of Newtown, he kind of turned around on gun control, and he got these new laws through. The recall effort, though, tell us about the roots of that. Where did it come from? When did it start? Was this something that began in-state? Is this a case of national groups looking in at Colorado and saying, we're going to make an example here? Where did the recall come from?
Well, it really started toward the end of the legislative session when it ended in May, and organizers, there were grassroots organizers in Pueblo, in Senator Angela Herron's district, who organized and got enough signatures to get this on the recall ballot. Then it really did start in the districts, in Morse and in Herron's district, but obviously it's grown to much more attention once these recalls came to the forefront and were actually certified and on the ballot. Now we see groups like the NRA getting involved heavily. We see groups like the 1630 Fund out of Washington, D.C., which is a 501c4, getting involved, and just hundreds of thousands of dollars coming into the race. But really, it did start off at the grassroots level, but it's become much more than that. It's about much more than the voters in El Paso County and in Pueblo, where it's really just a small group of voters who are going to decide these recall elections.
Well, Dick, from a Republican standpoint here in Colorado, how engaged is your party, sort of at the statewide level in Colorado? How engaged are you in this, in the process?
Well, I think Curtis makes a great point. point, Steve, that this did not start because of Republican efforts or even outside efforts by the NRA or whatever national organization you want to talk about. The fact is, this was started by a couple of plumbers in Pueblo who got very sophisticated in their petition drive, and the same thing happened in Colorado Springs. And it also is a symptom of what happened in the state legislature going back in January. Governor Hickenlooper came into that legislative session with astronomical approval ratings, 70% or more. Over the course of that session, the legislature passed a huge tax increase on rural Colorado, energy tax increase. It passed these gun laws, and there are a lot of culturally conservative Democrats, especially in these two districts, as Curtis said. And I think as a result of all these things, it contributed to the atmosphere of initiating these recalls. And in the case of Governor Hickenlooper, the guy who a year ago right now was being talked about as a presidential candidate, huge approval ratings, is now, his approval rating is upside down. It's actually, his disapproval is slightly higher than his approval. And I think this has repercussions in Colorado and the nation, what happens next week.
I want to pick up on that point. Now, first of all, we can have this. This is a head-to-head poll, I think, for next year. Prospective gubernatorial Tom Tancredo could be the Republican candidate. We can talk about that a little bit. But this is him matched up against John Hickenlooper. This was a Quinnipiac poll a couple weeks ago, and that shows you the sort of predicament that John Hickenlooper is in. But also in this same poll, voters were asked, should voters wait for the next election or force special recall elections when they don't agree with how state legislators vote? And here, by a 2-to-1 margin, they're saying no. Wait for the next election. There's no. So I guess my question to you, Dick, is you have these objections with these gun laws. You have these objections with other things that have happened in the state legislature. This is an extraordinary step to take to try to recall sitting legislators who really, you may disagree with them, but they're simply guilty of doing the job of a legislator. They're voting their consciences here. Is it right to be recalling them?
Well, I think a lot of us had questions whether a recall was a wise political decision, because I firmly believe that we ought to have that election serve the purpose of determining if an elected official has represented their districts. But it's important to go back to who initiated these recall petitions. They were not Republican activists or the Republican Party of Colorado or even the Pueblo or El Paso County Republican parties. These were citizens and many Democrats within these districts that just couldn't take this gun control legislation. They feel like it's an assault on their Second Amendment rights.
Well, Rick, I'd like you to respond to this. With the state Democratic Party, first of all, how engaged are you in these fights? How important is it for you to win these fights, and what are you doing to make sure your party does win these fights on Tuesday?
Well, we're very engaged. We've been engaged since day one, and we're going to do everything that we can to make sure that both Senator Hron and John Morse prevail. And I think Dick and I agree on a couple of things. This is a cultural issue. Guns are very cultural, especially in these two districts. But this goes beyond culture and emotion. This is a temper tantrum now that these folks have turned in and made the people of Colorado pay for. We're talking about things that are going to cost probably close to $500,000 for both of these races to be put on. And the point that you made is a fair point. John Morse is termed out in 1 year. Angela Hron is at the end of her first term in 1 year. So why make the people of Colorado pay for these temper tantrums that some of these folks are putting on right now? It doesn't make any sense.
Has it surprised you, though? Because my knowledge of Hickenlooper, I'm an outsider. I'm thousands of miles away from Colorado, but I always thought of Hickenlooper as one of these. He's a Democrat in a purple state, maybe a state that's trending a little bit towards the Democrats. I always looked at him as a very popular governor, and I'm looking at where his poll numbers are right now, and I'm looking at the gun issue, and I'm saying it surprises me as an outsider looking at Colorado, saying that maybe the gun issue had just pursuing what to me seemed like very basic, common sense, gun reforms here. He's paid a real political price for it, hasn't he?
Well, these are very basic and they're very common sense pieces of legislation. Expanding background checks to make sure that rapists and criminals can't get guns. It makes perfect sense, and a vast majority of the people in Colorado agree with it. And those are the steps that these lawmakers took, and this is the law that Governor Hickenlooper signed. So, I think it's important to point out that of all of the accusations that are going on out there, these are responses that are uniquely Colorado to Colorado real tragedies. Everyone in Colorado knows exactly where they were when Columbine happened. They know exactly where they were when the Aurora Theater shootings happened. And our lawmakers took action, and it may not be the most politically correct thing to do, but it was the right thing to do. And that's what's going on right now.
We will pick this up after this because we're going to be joined by somebody remote. This is John Morse. He's the state Senate president. He is one of the 2 Democrats who is facing a recall, whose political future will be decided in 48 hours. He is going to join us live next.
Thank you.